Another tiger has been spotted roaming around, this time in Edenvale, it's in the east of Johannesburg. The local SPCA is warning residents not to engage with the animal if they do approach it or if they find themselves having to deal with that situation, and to keep their children and pets indoors. This is the second tiger on the loose in just 2 weeks. So what are some of the legal implications, if you like, of domesticating wild animals, and is it viable or advisable to keep these big cats in suburbs, as an example? Let's unpack this with the spokesperson for Ban Animal Trading. That's Dr. Smaragda Louw, who joins us in our studios this morning. It's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much indeed for speaking to us.
Thank you.
I want to just begin by laying the context about what we know around why people would keep tigers, for instance. We do know that there's a huge international trade that takes place. So is it for commercial reasons, do you find, or mostly for bragging rights?
You know, I think it's a combination of both, really. I think bragging rights comes in the sense that, you know, they are not like us normal people who keep cats and dogs as pets, who have been domesticated over thousands of years. They have, number one, the finances to afford a tiger cub. They probably go between 20 and 30,000 rand per cub. And they also can afford to feed these cubs, you know, the chicken, which is not what they're supposed to be eating, but they can afford to give them, you know, the food that they need to kind of grow. So I think it's bragging rights in one. And then on the other hand, we have tiger farming. It's almost like, you know, we have puppy mills, or we also have tiger mills. And these tigers are being bred to be exported to places that the exporters in South Africa don't really care where they go, as long as they get the money that is paid for those tigers. There's no due diligence done. Sometimes we find animals going to zoos that don't exist. So, you know, it's a big story, and it's not only about keeping tigers in backyards, which for us in South Africa is very, very dangerous, clearly.
Do we know how many people are possibly doing that, given the loopholes that I imagine exist?
No, we don't, because of the fact that no permit is required in most of the provinces, Gauteng, Limpopo, Northwest, and so on. Wow. You don't require a permit. So nobody really knows how many people have a tiger, because there's no tracking of any of these animals. So no, we don't.
That's part of the concern. So are you telling me, as things stand in some of those provinces, I could own a tiger and nobody would be any the wiser?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Yes, if you have 20 to 30,000 rand, you can buy yourself a tiger today and keep him in your sitting room, in your lounge. And then when he gets bigger, you can put him in the yard. And then you're going to say that you keep him in an enclosure. But for the tiger, it's not an enclosure. It's a cage. Right. If you come to think of how far they run, how quick they run, the distances they travel every day. So yes, we're actually keeping them in cages, in captivity in South Africa for ego and greed.
And as irony would have it, that's likely to make that animal a whole lot more aggressive in the event that it does escape, which is, you know, perhaps some of the concerns that people share. There have also been conversations around tigers not being considered indigenous species, and that contributing to why they reckon the laws are problematic, as it were. Are you able to break that down for us? I mean, for instance, if they were considered indigenous species, how would that help?
You know, this is the problem. Because they are exotic animals, there are no laws against keeping exotic animals, except for a few species that are considered invasive species. Like, for example, I think they call them polecats. So you're not allowed to keep those and that species in Gauteng, because it's, you know, considered an invasive species that will take over. But there are no laws in South Africa against the keeping of exotic animals. So tigers are considered CITES Appendix 1 animals, which means they are critically endangered in the wild. However, because they are exotic animals in South Africa, you can hunt them, you can breed them, you can sell them, you can keep them as a pet. So it's almost like we are taking the focus away from the fact that these animals are endangered in the wild, because in South Africa there are so many we don't know where to turn when we see a tiger. So yes, the exotic animal legislation is basically non-existent. And in Gauteng specifically, we still work with laws that or legislation that came into play in 1983, which is the Gauteng Nature Conservation Ordinance. And in that ordinance, 1983, it does not say that you cannot keep a tiger, because tigers were not a problem in 1983. So this is the last time that those laws or that legislation was updated. There's nothing new.
Sure. One also wonders which other animal essentially can be kept in this way because of what you've just pointed out. I mean, tigers are in the news because that's what's essentially, escaped, for lack of a better term. It's tigers, essentially, that have been topical. But any other animals we should be worried about?
Sorry, I just want to finish. I didn't actually answer your question completely, the first one that the last one that you asked.
Sure, no problem. Go ahead.
You asked between indigenous and exotic. So this is how bizarre it is, because lions are indigenous animals. You're not allowed to keep them in your backyard. Because they're indigenous. But because tigers are exotic, you can keep them in your backyard. It really makes no sense whatsoever.
Right.
And yes, when it comes to exotic animals, you can basically keep any exotic animal as a pet in South Africa. And as ban animal trading, we are completely against this, because there's just no way ever that keeping an animal as a pet in a house, that you can actually provide for this animal's needs as it has in the wild. There's just no way.
So I can keep a kangaroo potentially?
Yes, you can keep a kangaroo. Although with Australia it's going to be very difficult. Australia has very strict laws about exporting and so on. So that would be a little bit less easy, I think. But the fact is that if you manage to get a kangaroo, yes, legally, absolutely, no problem.
I wonder to what extent that contributes to the problem, the fact that it's so easy to trade these tigers, that people find that this is potentially a very lucrative market.
Absolutely. Look, it's easy to make 20 to 30,000 rand, absolutely. And when they are exported, obviously, it's a whole lot more. And it's not one tiger who is exported. We have 16 tigers, 20 tigers going out at a time to places that really are not suitable. Zoos are also not places of conservation. So this is really all about entertainment. I think we can add that to its greed, its ego and entertainment.
Is it not possible to track those who might be breeding the tigers in South Africa because of those economic opportunities and making it sound better than it actually is? But you'll forgive me. There are people who obviously are trying to take advantage of some of these loopholes and make a quick buck, and I imagine some of them would actually look into how viable it is to breed these tigers.
Absolutely, absolutely, because they can sell them. Now tigers are in the news, so everybody's wanting a tiger. But to track them, I mean, how? How are you going to track them? Animals, exotic animals are supposed to have an import permit. If they are coming, say, for example, from Northwest, another province, into Gauteng, there's supposed to be an import permit for an exotic animal into Gauteng. But we are very well aware that animals come from other provinces without the necessary permits. So it's really just a big mess. There's just no regulation. Or maybe there is regulation, but nobody enforces it.
Right. I mean, for one, if I'm understanding you correctly, the owner of this particular tiger that's in Edenvale, actually, there isn't much recourse against that person, even if this tiger were to potentially, God forbid, kill someone.
I think then there will probably be other measures that people could take, other steps that people could take for, his animal killed a human,
right,
for not containing the animal and so on. I think there would be other things. But if an animal comes into the province without the necessary permits from another province, all they do is they give them a fine. So they'll get maybe 300 rand, maybe 400 rand, which is really, in the bigger scheme of things, for people who trade in tigers and so on, really small change.
Yeah. As an organization, I'm sure you've been pushing for some kind of change in the laws.
Yes.
Take us through the experience you've had with government, even before us getting to a point where this is an issue that becomes of national importance in public discourse.
Yes. We started in 2016, we started with a petition to stop pet shops from selling exotic animals, because you can also buy exotic animals in pet shops. There's nothing there that stops a pet shop from selling an exotic monkey or maybe having a tiger. I mean, there's nothing to stop that from happening. So we started with a petition then, and we had well over 15,000 signatures, if I remember correctly. We went to the Department of Agriculture at that time with our petition, with our legal documents, gave everything to them, and we never, ever heard back from them again, never. So, yes, we keep mentioning the laws need to change, the laws need to change.
Yeah.
But if there's no political will, it's not going to happen. And there doesn't seem to be political will. I mean, in the end, really, we have no water, we have no electricity. Are they really going to worry about permits for exotic animals?
That's sobering. In other words, we've got enough that we're dealing with. But there's also going to be a lot of concern, especially for people who are in Edenvale in this particular case, around what to do if they were, in a situation where they're confronted with this tiger. Is there advice that can be given? I mean, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's just the best to keep everybody safe. And I think, number one, get the SPCA involved immediately and get nature conservation in the province involved immediately. And let them handle it. Because right now, with the tiger in Edenvale, there seems to be like so many things going on here. And in the end, this specific case seems to be about ego. And not about the safety of the tiger. And not about the safety of the humans in the area.
Yeah. What do we know about the impact of keeping animals like tigers in enclosed areas? Because what we understand is that they're not built for that, really.
Absolutely, yes. No, animals are not wild. They're wild animals. So they're not domesticated. So you can never, ever remove the wild part, They become frustrated. I think just like a human, if you were locked in a bathroom for the rest of your life, what would happen to you? It would be exactly the same for a mammal, a tiger. It would be exactly the same for them, the frustration. They can't get to be with their own kind. So they are... It's just not necessary. And it shouldn't be allowed at all.
Yeah, well, hopefully this moment will help us revisit the conversation in a meaningful way in an effort to find solutions. Smaragda, Louw, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Really do appreciate your time helping us understand this issue better. Smaragda is with Ban Animal Trading, an organization trying to raise awareness around the dangers really of keeping animals like tigers in enclosed areas. Once again, thanks for coming through.
Thank you, Ayanda.